Now, we're both braving the cold to talk to Matthew Dunstan, the creator of the brand new game, or just upcoming game, Perspectives. Matthew, how's your PAX going? And you can tell me about Perspectives.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on. PAX is great. It's my first PAX ever, and it is so cold. but inside it's quite nice, and yeah, everyone's really friendly. Perspective, it's a new game from Space Cowboys. It's co-designed with my friend Dave Neal, and it's a cooperative communication and mystery kind of game, narrative game where players have a piece of information on cards that's just distributed between the players. The only rule is they can't actually show the cards to each other, so you have to discuss between each other what you can see, how that might match with what maybe your friend has on their card, piece together those bits of information and solve a mystery. In the box there are 3 different scenarios. Each scenario takes about 1.5 hours to play, and yeah, that's the kind of game. It's one of those games you don't want to say too much about before people get a chance to play, but we hope that it's, for anyone who like things like, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective or even Unlock and these kind of games where you're solving a puzzle together, this is sort of like a new take on that sort of genre.
Because you've done some work in that sort of genre with the Adventure series and Echoes as well. Do you find this is sort of your next iteration or your next way of exploring that space?
Funnily enough, this was actually my first foray into this space. As like the vagaries of publishing means that this one kind of got stuck in publisher limbo. So I designed this about 7 years ago. I was inspired by a game called Her Story, which is a digital game by Sam Barlow. I would recommend your viewers to play the game if they haven't got a chance, because it's incredible. And I always get quite inspired by seeing, especially in the digital games world, seeing what people do. I think there's a lot of experimentation. There are a lot of experimentation in tabletop too, but I find it quite inspiring. And that, I think it was this idea of having information that you're trying to solve a mystery from, but then getting new context on that information, even though the information is exactly the same. So the idea in this game is you have the same card in a part, and it's the same card. But as you get information from your fellow players, suddenly you'll realize, a particular detail in that image, that actually means that, or I can see this thing, and maybe suddenly makes something make sense. You had an image that's like, what is this? So I think it's those kind of aha moments and those real moments of cooperation and communication, which don't happen in a lot of the other narrative games. There is a sort of a central narrative, like there's a book that you're reading from, or there's like one puzzle that we're all focusing on. This is a really it's really sort of democratizing that experience. Like each player has a real important role to play in solving, and if one player isn't communicating what's on their cards, then you're going to be really stuck. So I think hopefully players will like that slightly different way of doing that kind of mystery experience.
We only got a very brief glimpse of it, so not really enough to sink our teeth into it, but it does make me sort of want to go, I want to see how this actually plays rather than let's just have a look over it over a cup of tea. One thing I've noticed with your career, Matthew, is you've worked with a lot of co-designers. How do you find that process of working with somebody else and working with different people with different games?
Yeah, I really enjoy it. You're right, it's the vast majority of my games are co-designs, and for me, there's a lot of different reasons for it. It's more efficient. I mean, when there are 2 people working on a problem, it's more likely that you're going to find a solution. And you always try and work with people with complementary skill sets. And actually the fun thing, as you mentioned, I work with different people, so that designing relationship changes depending on your co-designer. Sometimes you might be more of the person who makes the first prototype, or maybe you're someone who is more about refining it and editing it. And it means depending on the style of the game, I can work with different co-designers. So Dave Neal, who I made Perspectives with, is I think one of the most talented kind of narrative game designers in the industry at the moment. And I was really fortunate to work with him, and this game would not have existed without him, absolutely. And then for other games which have a different sort of style, then it makes sense to work with someone else. And at the end of the day, it's also ultimately it's much more fun working in the industry when you can work with other people. Designing is effectively a freelance job. It can be lonely, like a lot of freelance jobs. So having those times just to actually talk to someone else, bounce ideas off, it just makes it all the worthwhile.
So I guess having that relationships, it does sort of bridge the gap in the sort of often designing space where you're just working away on your game. Throughout your career, have you seen the games industry change much?
Wow, that's a small question. Yes, it has changed. I mean, I'm Australian, but I lived overseas for the last 13 years. I've only kind of moved back to Australia in the last year. And before I left, I was trying to set up kind of a playtesting group with designers in Sydney, and it was really like bare bones, sort of like bootstrapping, and PAX didn't exist at that point, and to come back 13 years later and to see so many new designers in Australia, so many new publishers as well, and PAX itself, how much it's grown, and all the kind of media and all the kind of that ecosystem grow. So yeah, it's changed massively, and the industry itself has matured. Even like narrative games, you think, in that time we've seen, starting with things like Time Stories and Unlock, they were really like the forerunners of these kind of like one and done play games, and at the time they were sort of revolutionary, and that's completely opened up a whole sector of new style of game. I made Next Station London, like roll and rights. You think about how. So yeah, the industry keeps evolving. I mean, in some ways it's nice to see it slowly like becoming more professional, and I'm always interested, for example, having more kind of rights for designers and sort of trying to not exactly have a union, but having a good way to kind of work with publishers and make sure that especially newer designers sort of taken care of in those relationships, because for them it's their first game, they don't know how the business works necessarily, and you just want to make sure they're kind of taken care of and make sure that they can have the kind of wisdom and experience of more experienced designers to help them out in that.
We've talked about a couple of your games here. If people hadn't played many of your games, what's some highlights or games that you've made that you really like to share or let people know about?
Sure. Well, there was Next Station London, which was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres this year. It's a flip and write game about making a metro map or an underground map. You have 4 different coloured pencils that you pass around. So I'd really recommend that. I also have I actually have a publisher of my own called Postmark Games. We do print at home games, so they're 1-page roll and write games. You just get the file sent to you, print off your 1 A4 page, and you play it at home, and you can print a page per player and play with other people as well. So that's at postmarkgames.com, and I'd really recommend. It's a bit of a different model. I never wanted to be a publisher, but we found a model where I can be a publisher without having to do any of the things I don't want to do, like worry about manufacturing. And obviously Perspectives is a really great thing if you want that kind of like narrative experience. And I think I'm trying to think that those are the main ones I sort of start with, and go from there.
And then spiral through every other game, of course.
Check me out on Board Game Geek. I mean, the tricky thing is also, the industry is global, obviously. I work with a lot of European and US publishers, so it's always a bit tricky to know like what's available in Australia, for example. It sometimes takes a little while for things to filter down here. But hopefully, I also have a game called My Shelfie, which I've seen at which is with Phil Walkarding, who's here today, and really fun kind of like Connect 4-esque style, really kind of toyetic sort of fun family style game about arranging objects on your shelf, which is also something fun to play with a family setting, any kind of age, I would say.
Matthew, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.